So, good morning, everyone. This lecture is, as I announced last time, about modernism and postmodernism architecture, which is kind of the biggest or most important contradiction, I think, in history overall. So, when we look on my timeline briefly, we are in the very recent time. So, the modern era, right, as I said, starts around 1500, 1500 after Christ with the Renaissance architecture or the humanistic period. And now we are just in a very top peak of my timeline around the year 2000. So I wrote here 1890, start of Art Nouveau and Art Deco, right? So this is kind of the beginning when human created first time, or architects and artists created first time something like intentional new style around 1890 that should match the time. And my timeline is very dense there. So modernism, I think I wrote the beginning there around 1920, so that's not totally correct. It's like 1910, we have the first ideas already. And then with Bauhaus architecture, which has its peak in the 1920s and came down towards the end of 1920s. And then the second part of this lecture is the postmodernism. I wrote here the year 1968, the beginning of the student revolution in Germany and France, and then it spread all over the Western world, America too. So we are in the peak of this timeline from between 1900 and today. So, and what led to modernistic architecture and later the contradiction postmodernism? The classicism and historicism, which we talked about in another lecture. So the time of the architecture of the 19th century looked like that. So this is an example of the classicism, which tried to duplicate the classic architecture of mainly ancient Greek architecture, as precise as they could. So in the Renaissance period, they tried that already, right? And they partly did not really know exactly how the Greek architecture was designed and constructed around 1500, right? So around 1800, that's a building from Vienna on the left from 1800 something. Try to go back to the ancient classic, so mainly the Greek and the Roman, but mostly the Greek classic period, as exactly as they could. But here you see already they interpret even that in a new way. On the right side you see a museum, I think, which interprets these elements already with arcs and in a very flat and strict style. That's a time between 1800 and 1830, let's say, and tries to go back to the Greek classic, right? And then later it became more and more opulent. So this is new Baroque that you can see. So during the 19th century, people found this classicism from 1820s and 30s mainly a bit boring, and they said cold. So there wasn't mainly the people in the population. So they wished something more emotional and rich. So then during the 19th century, as I explained in another lecture before, the architects tried to go back to ancient styles more, and they in the end try to copy everything, but mainly copy the elements of Gothic architecture or Baroque architecture. So they just copy the style, and on here you see a new Baroque apartment house on the left side, and on the right side a concert hall in Hamburg, which just takes the style from the Baroque time in the late 19th century. So they just applied ancient styles on contemporary buildings, so that time contemporary buildings. And here I took a photo from Hamburg, which shows this criticism that came up then. So architects themselves criticized that, because here you see a street, it's called the Kolonnaden in Hamburg, near the center, which is funny enough kind of one building. So you see two photos from the same street, and there's one long building, and the floor plans are same in the whole street. It's an apartment house. So on the ground floor are shops, 1.5 floors, and then apartments, and they all have the same floor plan. So, but then they applied different styles. On the left, you see something new, early Middle Ages, and behind is a new Renaissance. And on the right photo, you see on the right side something like Neo Baroque, and on the left again something like early Middle Ages or high Middle Ages decorative elements. So they just applied that on the facade, but the construction is everywhere the same, and also the floor plans are all the same along the whole street. So architects criticized that, and then they tried around 1890, they tried to think, how can we design a new style that fits our time? So this is like in French Art Nouveau. In England it had Art Deco, but in a different way a bit. And then in Germany it's called Jugendstil. And they this is the first time that like architects and artists like intentionally try to create a new style that fits their time. So they kind of sit down thinking, how can we express our current like lifestyle and culture, and B, use the contemporary construction materials, which was iron there already, not steel yet, but they had iron and iron concrete, and to create something new. So here you see a house Tassel, which is very famous because it used these floral elements and create something like really beautiful. So they try to use the contemporary construction methods. Here you see the interior hall of the staircase of the same building, house Tassel, and it's a bit like Gothic. So they use like columns, but made them very slim because they still say now we have iron, not steel yet, but iron. So we can construct something very thin. And they also did like, there's no more, did like the columns you see on the left picture, the columns between the windows, like very thin, because they said, we don't need the thick columns anymore made of stone like the Greek architecture because we have the iron. So they tried to create something new, but it was an intentionally new created style. Like in Paris, they have a lot of still the subway stations. They're very famous for that because they designed many subway stations called Métro there in Paris, all differently in this kind of time, in this kind of style in that time. So it's quite a beautiful. But then people sit down and try, how can we do something completely new, right? And I will talk about the architecture too soon, which you probably all know, the Bauhaus architecture and the radical break. But first of all, some like cultural background that displays best, I think, this modern thinking, and then later the postmodern thinking, which is more like a self-understanding and a way of thinking than just this style. So the architecture style comes out of the self-understanding and the mindset, you can say. So house Tassel, and then communism and et al. And others. So communism and others. So communism is emerged like around 1800, right? The first thoughts in the 18th century already, same time with Industrial Revolution. But communism, going back to that guy, right, Karl Marx, what's the idea? He said like, move the history. He said the history stands on his head and move it up to the feet. So like switch the history or the culture 180 degrees. So it's the idea, Marx and Engels, right? They also talked about a complete revolution. So they didn't want to evolve history in a certain way. They want to really, as I wrote here, break the past, radical break with the past. So it's not like nature nowadays we know nature evolves, right, slowly in its own pace. And it changes, yes, it evolves. It doesn't stay same the whole time. But in nature, that's my opinion now, there's nothing as a radical break. I mean, like revolution. But Marx and Engels, they thought about revolution. On the right side, you see a Russian propaganda poster. Because in Russia, it became reality at first, right, with Lenin, I think 1818, 1819. When did it happen? In 1918, when Lenin kind of in Russia installed the communist empire there, and later Stalin made it like extended it, right? So that's the idea, to radically break the past, which in my opinion doesn't work, because nature doesn't work like that as well. It's evolution, not revolution. And then here I put the architecture here already. So I put three names here: Hilbersheimer, Le Corbusier, and Gropius. So these are three architects that I think you should all know. Hilbersheimer is not that famous. Of course, Le Corbusier is very famous, but he was not part of Bauhaus. And Walter Gropius was the first director of the famous Bauhaus school, right? But I put Hilbersheimer first because he's the most radical. He's not too famous, but you see, like, it's already funny. I mean, he made these drawings, that time, of course, hand drawings, 1924. So these first ideas of something radical new emerged in the 1910s already, just before the First World War, out of the so-called Werkbund ideology of like honest material, and something which was, the Werkbund already emerged before 1910, but Hilbersheimer, so this is 1920s, had this, these people, not just Hilbersheimer, had this idea, we take everything away. So these kind of, they criticize these apartment houses in Hamburg, for example, where you just apply the style on the completed architecture. So it was a bit like they built the house around 1890, right, or earlier. And then it was kind of complete already, the brick building and all the floor plans and the windows and the walls. And then the Baumeister, so the chief of construction there, he asked us, so which style should we apply? Maybe some Baroque elements or Gothic? What do you want? They asked the architect or the developer, right, the real estate developer, what style should we apply? And these architects criticized that. So this is the idea to eradicate everything, as I will show you soon in another design of Le Corbusier, eradicate the whole city basically and all the tradition and create something like new from scratch. So here you see the perfect city of Hilbersheim, right? Hochhausstadt means high-rise city. And yeah, this is how he thought it's the perfect city for people to live. I think upstairs is like housing and on the ground floor like shopping, and you see the huge transportation elements and like streets and squares. And it's like he didn't see the needs of trees. I think at that time people even talked in the future we can like create like oxygen with machines in the factory, so we don't even need trees. Trees are like old-fashioned, and so this is what I mean. They radically break with everything, even the nature and human tradition, human scale, of course, the human body, but also the nature itself. So there's not one plan and one green in this whole design, right? And I think it's intentional, so that's why I put there, because it's so radical, and on our current perspective, it looks really desperate, in my opinion. So nobody want to live there nowadays, right? And this is how they wanted to implement it in the city. So I think it's in Berlin, but I'm not. Yeah, that's Berlin. Yeah, these are the two churches in the center of Berlin, near Friedrichstraße. So they wanted to eradicate the past. So literally demolish all the buildings and build this perfect city, like a lot of space between the buildings, right? And then make the buildings higher to get this similar density. So get the same amount of people by making the buildings long without gaps and higher, so you get like more space around for like recreation or happiness. So, and this is like the perfect design. That's how people will be happy, right? That's what they suggested, not just him, but it's just this like absurd example from nowadays perspective. That's why I put it there. And Le Corbusier did something similar, and he's not related to Bauhaus at all. He was French, but he was not even an architect. He was from Switzerland originally, right? But French-speaking part of Switzerland. And then moved to Paris and had his office with his cousin and in Paris. And he was really good in marketing. I mean, we will talk about him in other lectures. So he took the ideas of the time. So these ideas were not originally him. None of his ideas. But he took other ideas that were like emerging, and he transformed it into something really to strong images and theories and sketches. And this is a model, right? So this is like his Plan Voisin from Paris. So you see on the right side of the left photo the Isle of Paris. So that the island, the center of Paris with the Louvre. And then he wanted to, there again, demolish the whole city where it's now Paris. I mean, where people like to live, which is, of course, in reality still existent. So on the right side, you see the plan. He wanted to erase all these old buildings because they saw it as trash. I always ask myself why they didn't suggest these designs for like outside the city so they don't have to demolish everything. But no, it's, of course, like stronger. And as I said, Le Corbusier was really good in self-marketing and also marketing itself, like marketing his ideas. So of course, people will discuss about that when they see something like that, especially when you're from Paris and you kind of love your city, even when it's messy and dirty and chaotic. So they will talk about that. And he knew already that people will discuss about radical ideas. So he published that in newspapers that time. I think, not sure if he has built any famous project at that time, but like he was, maybe one or two, but he was like, he became famous by publishing ideas from his time in a radical way, and he knew people will discuss about that. So that's the Plan Voisin. So take everything down and replace it by these skyscrapers in this case. And he found these kind of cross skyscrapers are the perfect way to live. So let's build the same. So that's this modern idea. We can develop the perfect archetype, the perfect type of a house, and just duplicate it as many times as we want, and people will be happy there. So that's the idea of modern architecture. And here's a design from, so here he made it like as an ideal city, not in the center of an existing city, but like freestanding. You see, like so this is perfect. If we build like that, everyone will be happy. Of course they're not. These are the sketches. See, he published it that way, and he's like, he was good in sketching too, so he can communicate it in an effective way, and people will discuss about that. And here this I put like ironically because that's in China, contemporary, like recent, and people say, oh, they built Plan Voisin here in China. You see, like, do you want to live there? I mean, I would suicide if I have to live in this kind of, yeah, this very inhuman block. It's like not beautiful at all, right? So, and here it's his 5 points on the right side, which does not really come from him as well. But he, again, communicated it very effectively and built this perfect Villa Savoye. So this, again, like breaking with the past. I will make another lecture about that. Actually, it's not all really new, and it's not his idea originally. But it comes from Cité Industrielle. It's another book. Now I forgot the author. A bit earlier, Cité Industrielle is the title of the book. I forgot the author right now. I will present that in another lecture anyway. So, but he communicated it very effectively. And there you see the flat roof, the horizontal window that he says is possible now because of the steel concrete. That time already they had steel. And it's raining all the time in this inside the house, by the way. It's like they didn't get the roof closed until today, so it's like still wet inside. But the flat roof and the garden on the roof and the possibility to circulate with the car and transportation under the house. So these are his ideas of a new architecture, and here he displayed it like perfectly in a private house. And by the way, he designed mostly private houses in the 1920s, like villas for the rich people. They liked those ideas. Here's another one. This is a famous one too, because it's like radically, and I mean, these designs are like, how you say, when you go there, I mean, I went there, it looks like really fascinating, and it still looks like, I mean, modern, but you know, to use this word, like it's really stupid. Anyway, the word modern is like so misunderstood, but I mean, very radical, right? These houses, and especially when you imagine 1927, I mean, how did people live? And then they see this house in their neighborhood. So what will they think? It's, of course, very provoking. And now we come to Walter Gropius. So he was the first director of the Bauhaus, the German famous school of architecture, right? Which I think was founded in 1919 and then had its peak in the 1920s. And they already were lacking of students number end of 1920. So actually the students numbers went down, you can say organically, so by itself, in the 1920s, because also architects criticized this school, the Bauhaus, during the 1920s, and then it was closed in 1933 by the Nazis. But actually, some historians say, you should not say that too loud, but they say that the Bauhaus would have gone anyways in a few years later after the Nazis closed it, 1933, because yeah, the student numbers went down from end of 1920s anyway. So Walter Gropius is the first director of that. And he promoted these, they call functionalism. I mean, I will make another lecture about that too, because how functional is it to make a flat roof in a country where it rains a lot? So, of course, the water will not drain probably. And the Villa Savoye, as I said, they could never really fix the roof. So why is it functional to make a flat roof in a country where there's a lot of rain? So, I mean, I will criticize that in another lecture, but whatever. So they consider this as functional to make a flat roof in a country with a lot of rain, and then large windows and blah, blah. So that's the idea of to design everything like out of function, which they also didn't really do, but they kind of could communicate that in a like, how to say, in an effective way also. So they could like criticize the whole 19th century architecture that we saw before, for example, the street in Hamburg, and say this is like so decorative, and yes, it was. So let's just do the basics, kind of the things we need, and convert this into a style. So now I will show like more ideas, which I think show more the ideas of modernism, So I will show more slides, and they will transport, I think, the idea of modernism well. And later I show like some which transport the ideas of postmodernism and the architecture too, to see the contradiction. So one is Bruno Taut. He's a German architect as well. Not too famous, but I think he should be famous because he was spiritually interested. He was also in Japan. He knew about Indian spirituality as well. And I think he studied Hinduistic architecture. And so he designed some housing projects in Berlin. They're all very colorful. But here I don't show his colorful housing projects. I show, this is, you see already 1914. So he used steel and glass to create some. On the right side, you see the influence from Hinduistic temples, by the way. On the left side, not, but he used glass, and this glass is all like colored, so it's not transparent glass. I mean, it's transparent, but it all has colors in it. So he wanted to show the beauty of light shining through colored glass, basically as in the Gothic churches. And he had this kind of, that's why I called this episode here, this chapter, Dreaming the Future. He was like a dreaming kid a bit. And I kind of like him, and he was like very poetic. So he was not like so cold and heartless like Hilbersheimer, for example, and not so theoretical like Gropius. But yeah, so on the left side is a glass palace. And this is one of I put the housing project. So this is a housing project. I mean, the facades here are white, but the houses around are like colorful, like on the right side. And this is a Siedlungsproject in Berlin. And he designed it like, so all like very poetic, and I think, so I put the housing projects here. So that's in Berlin. And they still exist. Now they're renovated in the original colors. So he wanted to make everything like happy and colorful. So the new chemical colors that emerged at that time could realize that. So before you couldn't do black houses, right? But here these kind of strong Dispersionsfarbe, I don't know in English. So these kind of new chemical color technologies could realize this strong contrast colors. And he made houses that look, as you see, like from the 1920s, they have a roof, so they look kind of traditional for our current perspective, but they were the contemporary style in terms of architecture, and he colored everything very strong and happily. And this is what I mainly want to show. So it's a great book, Alpine Architektur, which means Alpine architecture. So he wanted to build like glass palaces all over the Alps. So he wrote this, he drew it. It's drawings, and they were colored with watercolor. I will show them now. And they're really beautiful. So on the first we see like black and white, and later there are color versions too. So he painted this while he was kind of a soldier in the First World War, but he was not really on the front fighting. He was like, how you call this, for like communication and something. So he was in a small office the whole day and had not too much to do, being a soldier at the end of the First World War. So, and then he got like a bit depression, I think. So he kind of helped himself by dreaming things that would, using the new technologies that came up, glass and steel, by the way, basically, glass and steel, to create something fascinating. So he wanted to build like glass palaces all over the Alps. So here you see the Alps, the big mountains that divide Germany and Italy, right? And here you see colored versions. So he wanted to even reshape the mountains, reshape the Alps. It's like ridiculous. Reshape it and build like glass and steel palaces. Not really palaces. I think most of the buildings wouldn't have a function. There's something like, I think this one is like a townhouse or like an assembly hall for the people. So it's like a not really a useful function. I think he didn't design churches, but it has similarity to Gothic churches. So like just steel and glass creations, like on the mountains, on the hill. And the only function was to look beautiful and shine. So when the sun shine, the colorful light should shine through. So, and this is like, he wanted to do this all over the Alps. So it's like a bit crazy, but it shows this another part of modern idea, like contrary, of course, to Hilbersheimer and Gropius, it has no function, but it's like using the new materials to create something marvelous and large. And by like reshaping the nature, it overcame. So Hinduistic architecture would have never done that, right? Or tradition, they would always go along and according to nature. And like by reshaping the mountains and building something on the top of the mountains, it's like, okay, we can like overcome not just tradition, even like the world and the nature, how the Alps were built by nature, right? And redesign it better than nature did. So that's the main idea of that. And here, like, more beautiful in a fantastic way. So there's like something in the valley, and here and he get like stronger and stronger. Here he wanted to rebuild the Himalaya as well. So he was finished with the Alps, and then he said, why not Himalaya? So let's build glass and steel constructions with shiny, colorful glass all over Asia. And that's the here on the right side you see Himalaya, and all over Asia, so that when like an alien looks from the universe down on the Earth, it's like beautifully shining in like colors of glass and steel. So that's the idea, and that's like so fantastic. But on the other hand, it's like it shows his fantasy, and it shows a bit his spiritual side. But mainly it's like we can design the world better than the nature did. So that's the main idea of it. That's why I put it here as an example of modern thinking, but I mean a positive way of it, unlike the unfriendly Hilbersheimer high skyscraper cities. So like let's make something beautiful using new construction methods and materials, and make the world better as nature did. So that's kind of the conclusion of it. And then in the end, even stars and the universe. So this is a star, and redesign stars with like building glass constructions in the universe on the stars and make the whole universe shine. I mean, it's really beautiful, this idea, and like kind of childlike, but I really like it. It's a great it were like independent paintings in watercolor, and now they're like combined to a book, and you can buy this booklet probably now only secondhand, but it's like 60 pages or something. I have it. It's like really lovely. So these watercolor paintings, and the originals are in Berlin. So these watercolors are still like exist. You can go to a museum in Berlin and see them. They're like stored there. You can look at them. It's like lovely. So it's like a dream, right? A dream of future, a dream of the world, and here of the whole universe. So we can do it better than nature did. That's the conclusion of it. And then also the 12-tone music, right? And everything that came later. So I don't want to give here a lecture on history of music or composition, but when like this guy Schoenberg created the 12-tone music, that's also at the same time, right? 1919, when Bauhaus was published, is the first composition, not from Schoenberg, was actually, as I wrote, from Josef Matthias Hauer, but he did not become famous with it. It's again another guy who was probably maybe better than marketing too, same as Le Corbusier was, than the other guy. So Arnold Schoenberg, published later than 1919. Now I didn't write the date here. I said developed from 1906 onwards, but published for sure after 1919, because the other one is the first published version. And I didn't write a publishing date here. But so again, like breaking completely with the past and the tradition, and like creating something radical new from scratch. So he didn't want to use, when you listen to this 12-tone music, so you can find it on YouTube, right, and everywhere else. So Josef Matthias Hauer's first piece from 1919, and also Schoenberg compositions. It's like it doesn't use the human scale and the human hearing tradition. It just creates something completely new from scratch. And again, it's like people sit down, or he sat down and asked, like, how can we do something that fits our current time and our current culture? So it's like intentional creation of something new, and it didn't like grow or emerge like historically, organically, right? Old tradition and composition like grew organically, like in its own pace. And he sat down, okay, how can we create something new and something that fits our time? Yeah. And then, I mean, there are so many examples that show the absurd and weird ideas of modern thinking, but I put a few more. So the straightening of the rivers. So until the 1960s, they straightened the rivers. So this is from Germany example. So this is how the rivers on the left looked before, and then they artificially make it straight to make shipping and transportation easier, and also just like, I mean, why does it have to be so chaotic? Let's do it straight. So that's the idea, that human can make the world better than nature did. And of course, it didn't work out. It leads to flooding. Even when there's flooding in Germany now, it leads to, when you like modify one thing and make it better, humans cannot, I mean, that's the current view we have on it. So we cannot like think in all factors. So we maybe improve the way to ride ships on it. But yeah, the water flows like faster, and then it leads to flooding in the end. So people stopped doing that, I think, from 1970s or 80s onwards. So when they realized the tremendous problems they created, even like there's less like wildlife and something and creatures. So nowadays we know the rivers, how they were like designed by nature or grown organically, is actually kind of the best way for the nature and the world. But again, it's like human thing, okay, we can do it better than the nature. So that's why I put this example here. And it has like horrible impacts on the nature and wildlife, and also on the country itself. I mean, the flooding problems, right? And then Atlantropa, so that's really a great example. That's why I put that here too, because that's another great example how humans think they can be better than nature. It's a great project. You can research about that online. They have more stuff in the internet about it. It's really great. Atlantropa was the idea. It's so funny to like. So it's an idea of one guy. His name is Hermann Zörgel, and he went out to find money to approve this project. He started in 1928, and he ran to the governments of Europe, and he was collecting money, and he wanted to realize that. So it's a fantastic, weird idea. And nowadays we know it would have been horrible if he realized that. So, but nevertheless, so what's the idea? Hermann Zörgel, German engineer, I think, had the idea to build a big like dam between where like Spain and Africa connects, in a so-called Strait of Gibraltar. So he wanted to create a dam where electricity is produced, and by that lower the height of the Mediterranean Sea. So lower the height of the Mediterranean Sea and water Africa's deserts. So use the water, first of all, create this dam near the Strait of Gibraltar between Spain and Africa, and then use the water to water the desert. And he said we can do agriculture there, and at the same time lower the level of the Mediterranean Sea. I forgot how many meters. But then what will happen is that, of course, you see the green areas on the left map. The land of Europe and Africa will become larger, and here it's a contemporary visualization how that would look like. So you see on the top side how thick Italy is now. So you would create new land, and he would build like new cities. Perfect, of course, new cities after the modern design, like Hilbersheimer probably and something. So new land, and make everything better than the nature did again. So create these kind of new cities, and in his thoughts, it had like a lot of advantages doing that. So lowering the level of the whole Mediterranean Sea, and creating new land on the north of Africa and the south of Europe. And he listed the advantages of that. So that's like crazy. And I mean, nowadays, if they realized that during 1930s, so if he could convince all the European governments, that time they didn't have European Union yet, right? And they realized that, and the new continent he created, really, he called Atlantropa, right? So it would be a natural disaster. So for everything, I mean, for Europe, for Africa, for the whole climate, and also for the Mediterranean Sea. So if this would have been realized, it would be a tremendous disaster. We know nowadays for everything, for nature and climate. And yeah, but that's again this idea of like modern thinking. So like we can do it better than nature did. So this is like so ridiculous. You can research about that in the internet. It's so interesting. It was one guy, Hermann Zörgel, thought about that Atlantropa project. And from our perspective, it's ridiculous, but that shows again this kind of modern thinking. So now we come to these here, the oil crisis 1973. These examples that led to postmodern thinking, and that is partly another way of thinking. So here you see like oil crisis 1973, I don't want to explain the backgrounds of that, but there was suddenly no oil, right? It became very expensive, and then because of political situations, and then suddenly it was, oops, like it's not like endless. Our resources are not endless. We cannot like. So it's like this. What led to the green movement and everything. So it's like it led to another thinking that we are not better than nature. We use the nature, but we have to be more friend with the nature. We cannot exploit the nature endlessly, right? So it led to the whole like, green movement that also like is nowadays shows it like environmental politics and like alternative energies and so on. And it started, the big awakening was 1973 when suddenly oil was so expensive that you couldn't run your cars anymore. It was like, oops, we have to rethink everything. And then there's this kind of famous report, the end of, no, I didn't put the title here, the end of Unlimited Resources by the so-called Club of Rome. So they published that, I forgot the year, and had this theory that leads to the green movement, that resources are not endless and so on. So, and then of course the Student Revolution 1968, which criticized tradition overall. And the interesting thing is they were like, so postmodernist, that's interesting because postmodernism see itself as a contradiction, so as an antithesis to modernism, but there are also like a lot of similarities. So here you see, so these were like classical left, and before I put communism there as an example for modern, so that's also left. So I mean, kind of the new movements are kind of always left, you can say. And so the modernist architect, like the second director of Bauhaus, Hannes Meyer, was a communist, and it was also closed, the Bauhaus, from the Nazis because they like convey like communist, radical left communist ideas, and Hannes Meyer was the second director of Bauhaus after Gropius was a communist. So they were left, and 1968 student guys saw themselves as left also, but in a different way. But so postmodernism is left again. And then, so they questioned the whole values and the whole society, right? You can read about that in the internet too. Very interesting topic. And I put this here as a last example, I think. So conventional medicine versus the new alternative. I put this lovely picture here. So the conventional medicine, like cutting in the body, like surgery, right? Cutting in the body to take the cancer out or whatever. So it's like really like, okay, this is a radical example, but like, it's like one human can do everything better than the nature by treating these people like so, how you say, radical and a bit like inhuman, a bit like against the nature, right? The classical Western medicine, while, for example, the traditional Chinese medicine, which has become also now popular nowadays because it sees the human more like part of a nature and more holistic. And then I put these lovely pictures here, like alternative medicine. So nowadays it emerges, not nowadays, already since 30 years, but since then, since postmodernism, it emerges this idea that like human are not like, cannot do everything better than the nature. We should work together with the nature. So, and then the death of modern architecture. So that's like this housing project. It's designed, actually the same architect that designed the World Trade Center. Yamasaki is his name, Japanese name, but he's, I think, born American, at least like an American architect. And that's a housing project in America, in Missouri, which is built 1954 and demolished from 1972 onwards, so not even 20 years after construction. And funny enough, it looks pretty similar to the Hilbersheimer ideal project, right, that I've shown you before. And also funny enough, it's implemented in a similar way in an old city, in this case St. Louis. And while the other pictures before were like drawn or like Photoshop per hand, right? Like 1920s, I didn't have Photoshop yet. So this is a real build project. So it's a housing project and it's kind of 1954. It's not, you can say kind of the peak of modern architecture. So it came up in the 1910s and 20s, right? The Bauhaus had its peak in the mid 1920s. Then it kind of came to an end by itself, end of 1920s. But after the Second World War, which finished 1945, it has this kind of, this 20 years, 1950s and 60s, which was like really prevalent of the modern architecture. Yeah, worldwide, or at least in the Western world. And this is a, let's say, ideal project. So this architect, Yamasaki, who also designed the World Trade Center, which was demolished 2001, many of his projects were demolished, I just recognized. So was demolished 1973. And if you look on that, it looks like, okay, this is what, not just him, it's like Western architecture was the common paradigm, the common way of thinking. So this is like how people can live happily, right? As I explained before. On the right side, you see a model. On the left side, this is a real photo. And oops, that's too fast. So this is like how people can live happily, right, in the terms of modern architecture. I should also have put the name of CIAM, Congrès International d'Architecture Moderne, CIAM, in it. I forgot to put that term in the slide. So that was an organization or a meeting of Western of modern architects from 1920s onwards, CIAM. You should Google or Wikipedia that. I should have put the term in that presentation. So they discussed like what's the perfect way of living, and this is, voila, how people live happily. But they didn't, because this one came to social problems emerged in this housing complex. So there were drugs and crime and demolishing, and windows were broken, and it didn't work at all. So the public authorities decided, not even 20 years after completion, that it does not work. And here's the result. So they moved people out and then demolished the whole complex, the whole area. So here you can see, and then Charles Yanks, who was a famous postmodern architect, theorist, and mainly architect. I show projects of him soon. He stated this a bit like sarcastic quote that you can read in a book. He wrote like, happily it's possible to date the death of modern architecture precisely in time. So modern architecture died in misery on 15 July 1972, and the exact time. Okay, it's like a bit like ironic or sarcastic, but even after 1972, they still built like modern projects. So it's not like from that time on, no architect in the Western world built in this modern style. Modern is a stupid term, but let's say in the Bauhaus ideology, flat roofs and everything that they call functional, which is mostly not functional, but this is what commonly known as modern. So the term modern is very broad and means actually something else, but let's call it modern architecture for now, modernism, because and then Charles Yang stated 1972, this project proved not working, right? I mean, there were like crimes and drugs and social problems, so it was not the utopia. So it was not the perfect paradise for people. That's why it's demolished, right? So and then starts postmodern architecture. So as I said, even after this incident, architects still built like modern architecture, and there was actually not like a big change from 1972 onwards, and also not in the end of 1970s. It was like postmodern architecture emerged as an antithesis, like a theory similar like the Art Nouveau, like let's think how we can make it better. And the architects sit down how to improve our own theories of modern architecture. And it was not like everyone agreed. It was basically postmodern was a time period that emerged in the 1970s as an antithesis or contradiction. It saw itself as a contradiction to modern architecture, and sometimes it's over modernist, so it's just emphasized and not even like a contradiction. These are two projects I will explain in a bit. So it saw itself as an antithesis to modern architecture, but not everyone agreed. So there were architects who continued with modern architecture until now. So it's modern architecture was a continuous movement until now. So this presentation is given 1923, right? 2023. So it was not a radical break, but this postmodern architecture emerged in the 1970s and then died kind of in the 1990s. So it was a 20-year period where it was dominant over modern, but it was not the only time. And then also postmodern architecture died. I will explain in a bit why. And then around 2000 is this kind of what they call, what we would call now contemporary architecture, or like some call it second modernism or second modern period, whatever. So here we see two postmodern projects. One early one from 1978 in America called Piazza d'Italia because it refers to Italian antique architecture, happily colorful. And on the left side, a quite late project, 1997, so that time postmodern architecture was pretty down already. But the left one is from James Stirling, who was a proven modern architect. So he had already a name as a more or less famous architect in the modern architecture. And then everyone was a bit shocked because not all architects like this new postmodern ideas, right? So everyone was a bit shocked. He like built now postmodern already in the 1980s, I think. And this project, or these two projects, I put because especially the left one shows typical elements of postmodern architecture. So they're all together. So and that's why I wrote them down here. I wrote this list myself, these 6 bullet points, so this building like ideally describes the ideal of postmodern architecture, which emerged, as I said, out of an antithesis to modern architecture. So while modern architecture tries to find the perfect solution, right, as we saw in the Missionary project, so one floor plan and one facade, and we copy that 20,000 times, and that's perfect, and people will be happy there, and that's how people should live. And then this one is the antithesis. So it's like, it's not unique, and it's not like one facade everywhere. It's fragmented. And so you see like, this is one building built at one time, right? At all together. And it has like different facade elements in it. So some facade elements are glass. Then you have these columns on the first floor. These, it's not really columns, but these large pillars. And you have like windows as like holes in the brick wall. So you have different elements together. You have the plain glass walls, but also you have like these kind of openings in the brick wall, windows as openings. And so it's fragmented, it's diverse. So it used like different elements all together. And of course it used the historical elements, as this Piazza d'Italia on the right side did like perfectly. So it was an ironic reference to a Roman or Italian piazza. Piazza means square, right? So they had these Forum Romanum and other forums in Rome, which used these elements, column, arc, architrave, and all that. So Charles Moore did the ironic reference. Later I talk about the irony in postmodern architecture. So in a colorful, happy, funny, ironic way, Charles Moore refers on the right side to Italian piazza square in the antique Roman time, 2000 years ago, right? And the building from James Stirling as well has historical references, not as strong and obvious than Charles Moore, but here you see the columns on the pillar on the left side that I mentioned before. These openings in this on the left side are reference to Roman or archaic rows of columns or pillar. And then you have the arc on the front as a clear address. So the modern architecture also tried to deny the entrance and the clear address. They wanted something homogeneous, like plain, and here's also the door, but they want to be not pathetic. They didn't like the pathetic entrance and the clear motive of the entrance. So this building does it differently. It clearly designs a front, so the arc on the ground floor, and then this circular hole window on the top side with the clock inside, and also the whole roundish tower. It's a clear address. So this is the front. So here, this is the building. Of course, it's also the front of this whole block, but it clearly creates an address. And that's modern architecture didn't like that. By the way, modern architecture always have a problem in the 1920s already with representative architecture. I can make a whole separate lecture about the representative architecture in the Bauhaus ideology. Very difficult. Le Corbusier managed it with the UN building, 1929. After a long process, he managed that as one of the only ones. And it's really difficult to find representative architecture solutions with the Bauhaus ideology. It was a big issue in the 1920s. So, but here it's not an issue because he used the historical elements. And then you also see the wall patterns, which refer to, pre-modern architecture. The wall patterns were used in the 19th century a lot. The colonnades, the arc, and it's colorful and it has something it should have. It wants to have something happy. So with this irony, and actually nowadays, or after the 2000s, architects said what actually killed postmodern architecture was the irony and the happiness. And this goes back, to these two guys, Robert Venturi and his wife, Denise Scott Brown. And they were they were American architects, and they also wrote books as theoretical books. And they, for some reason, implemented in the theory and also in their practical design this kind of happy irony. So I present a few projects of those. They acted as a couple, as architects. So the most famous name is Robert Venturi, but he worked in an office together with his wife. And so I show his projects, and then I show a few modern, postmodern architects who were not so terribly colorful, ironic, happy in their works. But after 2000s, architects said actually what killed postmodern architecture is this happy, ironic humor, because obviously humor is like not totally timeless. So jokes get out of time, and when you look on something and you laugh about it, you will laugh about it at the first time. So humor is not timeless, but nevertheless, this humor, also in my opinion, is the problem of the whole thing. So to create an antithesis to modern architecture and to identify its problems, which were obvious, for example, in the demolishing of modernist projects, which happened also after this case in Missouri. So demolishing of projects that were not even 20 years old shows that there's a problem about modern architecture, obviously. So nevertheless, Venturi created this postmodern architecture and also the theory. And these two projects show like the historical references, right? And the arcs, and it changes a lot. It implements a lot of elements that modern architecture also denied and didn't want. For example, the clear axis. So the both buildings are symmetrical, right? Or nearly symmetrical. The lower one is symmetrical. And both have an axis in the middle. So again, they show clearly the entrance, both of them. They don't deny representation or maybe even pathetic clear entrance. Both of them do that. But they both implement this form of irony and humor in it. And I think my opinion is this in the end killed, let's say, the postmodern architecture, because you laugh about a joke once, but when you pass this building every day, you don't laugh about the same joke on and on and on, and not even over many years. So people couldn't see these postmodern jokes after a while anymore. So further, I show a few architects who did not implement this funny, jokey thing so much as many others did. So Philip Johnson is a very important figure anyway, a guy who became quite old and who invented also the term international style for modern architecture. So he was not even an architect. He studied art history, very interesting figure. And art history. He studied art history. He was like a rich kid of a rich family, American, and then eventually start to build. And in the right side, you see 1984, a building that clearly refers to classical elements, but in my opinion is still like acceptable. It's not too humorous and funny. And on the left side, also something that refers to like Gothic cathedral shapes, right? Unfortunately, the 1980s used this mirror glass a lot, which makes it not timeless as well. I think if the left shape would be built in bricks, it would have been much more timeless than this mirror glass version. And that's the guy. He became nearly 100 years old. And as I said, he installed the term international style for modern architecture. So the term modern architecture is really stupid, but it's most commonly used. That's why I use it in this lecture. He created an exhibition that he called international style, which became a common term for modern architecture. And he also created another exhibition about postmodern architecture, and also is one of the creators of the term postmodernism. So even many postmodern architects didn't like the term postmodernism, but it became common. So on the right side, his Beck's house, which is kind of a bit odd and weird, but actually lovely, using these prefabricated elements, which indicates a version of arcs, classic arcs. And so I think his work is still like acceptable. On the left side, another mirror glass tower, which would have been better if it's not mirror glass, in my opinion. On the right side, a building which goes back to Jean-Etienne Boulet, which I explained in another lecture. So, but still, it's like, it becomes ironic because he kind of built a design from 18th century by Jean-Etienne Boulet in real. But I think it looks still more or less timeless and acceptable. It's built for university. And then I want to present this guy, Aldo Rossi, because there's another stream of postmodern architecture which goes back to him, Italian, a guy. And he also built clearly postmodern, but in a different way, in a more serious way. So sadly enough, there was like two poles, two end poles in the 1970s and 80s. And one was Robert Venturi, that I showed before, with his happy irony and colorful. And Aldo Rossi is like deadly serious. So it's like, it's slightly, I mean, it has more colors than modern architecture had. So it's not just white or beige. But as you see, it's like deadly serious. And deadly you can take wordly, because this is actually a cemetery. So this block should represent the death, and it's a wooden construction, and it's hollow in the middle. So it's very, very impressive. So it's highly poetic, and for me it has some in this basic thought similar feelings of like that in Bruno Taut that I showed before. So it's poetic, but I think it's a form of poetic architecture that mainly architects understand and like. I mean, I really like Aldo Rossi, to be honest, and he was a theorist as well. So that's another another way of postmodern architecture, which is European. I mean, it goes back to Italian Aldo Rossi, and is not so ironic and fun. And I think it's more timeless. So it's a bit like modern architecture 2.0 as well, because I think it's something that mainly architects understand, and it's not really something for the crowd. But nevertheless, he was successful, and he got like a lot of work to do. And here you see, and later people criticize him because they said he just copy himself. So on the left is a building in Berlin, and there you see also the fragmented facade. So it's like one housing complex, apartment house in Berlin. It still exists, and you see different colors and you see different shapes for every part. So it kind of suggests that are different houses, but actually it's one complex. So you see the idea of diversifying and fragmenting, which is still used nowadays, because we also say like one big block, nobody want to see that, it's boring. So fragmenting facades is still a common way of separating a large architecture project nowadays, right? This is an element from postmodern architecture which survived until today. On the right side, a project in Japan. So he used local elements, but people criticize him for copying himself on and on. But yeah, you see this axis. So modern architecture, as I said, didn't like symmetry and axis, clear axis and emphasis, and Rossi uses that a lot. So it's kind of has a clear reference to ancient Italian, I mean, Roman Empire was in Italy, right? Obviously. So to ancient Roman architecture, or ancient Italian architecture. So to his own history, because he was Italian. But I mean, it's deadly serious. It's partly over modern, but I kind of like it. I think it's a beautiful form of postmodern architecture. And then the other guy, Oswald Matthias Ungers, a German guy. Somehow you could say architect could not be more German than that. I mean, Bauhaus was also in Germany, but his architecture goes back to Rossi also. So he's kind of he refers to Rossi as well. He was a theorist as well. He wrote text, same as Rossi did. And he's kind of the development of Aldo Rossi's architecture, and in practice and in theory. So on the right side, we see a museum in Hamburg, an art museum, Museum for Contemporary Art, so which like shows his philosophy in an ideal form. So he in the end reduced everything to the square. So it's kind of classified as postmodern architecture, but it's already again a modern architecture 2.0, because it's like kind of also over modern. I mean, on the one hand, I think the museum is a good project, because on the one hand, it continues the nature landscape by this red granite basement, and then puts this ideal white block on top. So, and he also he reduced everything to the square. As you see on the right side, the floor plan, two squares, and everything is like, yeah, it's over perfect. So, and also the facade is like built up on squares, and his also ideal square is like 1 on 1 meter. So everything is like a 1 on 1 meter grid, the whole project. And here you see the details, and also the center, on the right picture is like a square, and floor plan of course as well. Everything's squared. And he also think of the archetype. So this is a cover from a German magazine. That means house and house, the building in the building. So that's one of his theory things. And here you see the idealized shape of the archetype of the house. So Rossi and also him thought a lot about the archetype, like the perfect type of a house. So that's a project in, by the way, a museum for architecture in Frankfurt, the picture, and he built it. Oh no, he renovated it to make it look like that. And here you see some, again, a bit how odd and weird it can be. So that's a private housing, and it's of course a squared floor plan. Everything is squared and everything is perfect. And then it puts this archetype roof on top. So it's like house. But there you see already it's like a bit dead as well. So it's not really lively. So yeah. Anyway, he's an example. It's not so horrible, I think, as this Charles Jens Piazza Italia in America. So it doesn't have this irony. It's deadly serious. And as I said, cannot be more German, I think, than that. But nevertheless, it's a form of postmodern architecture that's different to the Robert Venturi irony. So that's my last picture. That's also of architecture for today. Then I have a very good next slide. So that's the same architect, and it used traditional materials, right? The bricks. It try to connect with the nature, green and water, and it used classic elements like this row of columns or pillar, and it refers by that to ancient Roman architecture, Greek also and Roman, but it does it in an abstract way. So this is. It's kind of a bit poetic, but maybe a poetic way, as I said, that mainly architects love. But postmodern architecture wanted to connect more with the nature, not oppose it so much. So this next slide, I created myself, shows this contradiction of modern and postmodern architecture. As I said, in some terms, postmodernism is also modernism 2.0, and there are a lot of similarities. As I said, both were ideological leftist. I mean, now postmodern ideology is also seen as very left, and postmodern theorists like Derrida, Foucault, and so on, they were left too, and they classify themselves as socialistic, communistic, at least left. So it's not totally contradictory. But as I wrote here, in terms of architecture, if you want to oppose it, they have a different self-understanding. And it's not just architecture, it's the whole self-understanding. As I said, modern thinkers, not just architects, would say, now I oppose these sentences, right? So the world is understandable. They thought human are like, that's already another sentence. Human can be better than the nature. We can understand and analyze everything by science. Everything is rational. And then the postmodern theorists and also architects see and understand, or you can say admit, that the world is too complex to be fully understood. So we can analyze it, but we can never grasp the whole idea, right? That's why sociology, by the way, is so super postmodern, because sociologists like to talk a long time, and they hate to come to a conclusion. So they always want to end up saying, everything is too complex, we can't understand it. So that's sociologists, right? And it's postmodern. And then again, there are universal solutions, looking at that housing project, Hilbersheimer, and the realized version in Misery. that can be applied like everywhere. So also this colonialization idea, I didn't put that in. I mean, there are 100 more examples that would show postmodern ideology or modern ideology. So I just put a few, but colonialization, right? It was the idea they do agriculture in Africa and same as they did in Northern Europe. And of course, all the grains died because it's another climate. So it doesn't work. You cannot apply like one solution everywhere on the world. But modern architecture sees itself as international because they thought as the Hilmersheimer project. So this is perfect floor plan, perfect facade. We just copy paste it all over the world and everyone will be happy. So that's ideal. So it's this universal solution that can be applied everywhere, right? It's two things. And postmodern says, no, we have specific times and specific places and cultures and people. And for that, we need to tailor specific solutions. So it's two things, right? It's one that they emphasize the local and local architecture. Then vernacular architecture also emerged in that time. So they said, hey, moment, let's look at that not classical, but that old architecture from certain areas and cultures and places that merged together into vernacular architecture, which is a subject even university now. So vernacular architecture is a postmodern idea to emphasize that. And then, so solutions can be found, third sentence of modernism, can be found by using our rational intellect. So if we think just good enough, we can understand everything and we can make it better. And then the postmodern would say, no, we are fallible. Like, for example, straightening the rivers. I mean, we thought, okay, just make the river straight and everything will be better. No, it's not. It become nature disasters, as I said, wildlife problems, diversity problems in the cultures of plants and animals and everything in the water and around it. So, no, we are fallible. We are not better than nature. So that's maybe the biggest contradiction there in the self-understanding. So modernism is a development from humanism from around 1500, right, which put the human in the center. And then the rationality, so with the philosophy of the Enlightenment in around 1800, leads to this idea of modernism that humans are capable to be better of the nature. And then with the oil crisis and stuff, we discovered, no, we can understand the nature partly in the world, but we can't be better than the nature. And also we are part of it, we are not opposing it. And then fourth sentence of modernism, these solutions are like general, okay, they're not bound specific time and places, and postmodern would say the opposite, as I explained already before. So there are different needs and different people and different opinions, and that leads to what they call diversity. And then last but not least, it's this kind of break with the past, this overcoming of traditions, right? Clearly seen in the philosophy of Karl Marx himself. And then also the Bauhaus, it was like that they see really all traditional architecture until 1920s as totally stupid. So they really see, it's not just like, oh, it's old, let's do something new. The Bauhaus ideologists, also Walter Gropius, the first director, and other architects who lectured there, saw like, okay, that's like really stupid how they built in 19th century the houses. The people were just not smarter, they said, and they had not the right technologies, steel, concrete, and stuff, and steel and glass facades. But it's not true. I mean, they were not stupid. So this very arrogant, actually, a very arrogant self-understanding that Gropius and co had in the Bauhaus, and they thought, okay, all tradition is really stupid, and so that's why Karl Marx and also Bauhaus and also other thinkers, like really, they didn't even question that breaking with a tradition is good. So they thought like breaking a tradition and throwing away the past is obviously good. No, but it's not. And then the postmodern discovered that after 20 years, housing projects that are not even 20 years old are demolished, as I showed, right? The postmodern say, no, but maybe our traditions were not so wrong, and maybe they were helpful. And as I said, they're also local and diverse and different in every region of the world. So maybe we should not demolish everything. I mean, in the 1960s, I haven't shown that, but they demolished like completely intact and great and lovely buildings in everywhere and all over Europe and America. So they didn't even think that like maybe that's a good thing to maintain. It's like conserving, keeping like existing, also like housing build, they just demolish it and make it better because they thought modern architecture is better. I haven't shown those pictures, but it's like demolishing of something that nowadays we would think is really beautiful, and they just turn it down because it has no value for them. So everything before modern architecture, 1920s, they saw until the late 60s as totally having no value. So just like turn it away, people were stupid. And then postmodern building that, and then postmodern architecture theorists saw no, maybe they were better because actually people can live happily even nowadays in houses from 19th century, right? But not many people want to live in a 1950s housing project. So you see this everywhere in the Western world in the rents. So you pay higher rent and buying prices for housing before 1900 and lower rent for a modern project, let's say 1950s or 60s housing building in the cities in wherever, Europe or something. So there you see it. But this slide, I think, clearly shows the different architectural opinions, but also a general self-understanding of human capability and of culture. Yeah, thank you.